Napoleon Bonaparte stands as one of the most extraordinary figures in world history. Few individuals have risen so rapidly, ruled so absolutely, or reshaped an entire continent so profoundly within a single lifetime. Born in 1769 on the island of Corsica to a family of minor nobility, Napoleon was not destined for greatness by birth. His family possessed status, but little real power or wealth, and his Corsican origins marked him as an outsider within French society. Yet it was precisely this outsider status, combined with immense ambition and talent, that would define his rise. The French Revolution created conditions unlike anything Europe had ever seen. The destruction of the old aristocracy shattered traditional hierarchies and opened pathways for advancement based on ability rather than lineage. Napoleon, trained as an artillery officer, benefited immensely from this upheaval. Artillery required mathematical precision, logistical planning, and technical competence, skills Napoleon possessed in abundance. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he was not merely brave or charismatic, but intellectually formidable. His first major opportunity came during the Siege of Toulon in 1793, where his innovative use of artillery forced the British fleet to withdraw. This success earned him rapid promotion and the attention of revolutionary leaders. 2 years later, during the Royalist uprising of 1795, Napoleon again proved decisive by dispersing insurgents with artillery fire in the streets of Paris. This moment secured his political relevance and placed him firmly within the inner circles of power.
Don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot.
Let's continue. Napoleon's Italian campaign of 1797 to 1797 transformed him from a promising general into a national hero. Commanding an underfunded and poorly supplied army, he used speed, surprise, and aggressive maneuvering to defeat Austrian and Allied forces repeatedly. Rather than relying on static defenses or rigid formations, Napoleon emphasized mobility, concentration of force, and independent corps capable of rapid action. These principles would define Napoleonic warfare for the next decade. By 1799, France was politically exhausted. The Directory was deeply unpopular, corruption was rampant, and military success abroad could not compensate for instability at home. Napoleon recognized that power was available for the taking. Through the coup of 18 Brumaire, he overthrew the existing government and established the consulate, with himself as first consul. Though Republican language remained, authority was centralized almost entirely in Napoleon's hands. What followed was one of the most remarkable periods of state-building in modern history. Napoleon stabilized the economy, reformed taxation, and created a centralized administrative system that extended French control into every province. The Concordat of 1801 reconciled the French state with the Catholic Church, neutralizing religious opposition. Most importantly, the Napoleonic Code standardized law across France, enshrining equality before the law, property rights, and secular governance. These reforms ensured that Napoleon's rule rested not only on military success, but on genuine institutional foundations. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French. This act symbolized the end of revolutionary uncertainty and the birth of a new political order. It was a declaration that France would no longer be guided by ideology alone, but by power, stability, and continuity. Across Europe, monarchs watched with alarm, but also with grudging respect. Militarily, Napoleon was nearly unstoppable. At Marengo in 1800, he defeated Austria and secured French dominance in Italy. At Ulm in 1805, he annihilated an Austrian army through maneuver rather than battle. Later that year, at Austerlitz, he achieved what many considered the greatest tactical victory in European history, crushing combined Austrian and Russian forces. The Third Coalition collapsed. The Holy Roman Empire, a political structure over 1,000 years old, was dissolved. In its place arose the Confederation of the Rhine, a French-dominated alliance of German states. By 1806, Napoleon stood at the height of his power. France dominated Western and Central Europe. Italy was reorganized under French control. Austria had been humbled, Prussia was neutralized, and Russia had been pushed eastward. Yet beneath this apparent triumph lay the seeds of future collapse. Napoleon had mastered the art of winning wars, but the challenge ahead was far greater: constructing a European system that could endure.
Napoleon believed deeply in the decisive power of victory. To him, war was the ultimate arbiter of political disputes. While he understood diplomacy, he often treated it as a temporary tool rather than a permanent structure. This approach clashed sharply with the worldview of his foreign minister, Charles Maurice de Talleyrand. Talleyrand was a survivor. Born into the high nobility, he navigated the collapse of the monarchy, the radical phase of the Revolution, Napoleon's empire, and the Bourbon Restoration. His longevity was not accidental. He believed that lasting power came not from domination, but from balance. France, in his view, could lead Europe only if it restrained itself. Napoleon, however, was intoxicated by success. Victories reinforced his belief that enemies existed to be defeated, not accommodated. He humiliated defeated states, redrew borders unilaterally, and installed relatives on foreign thrones. While these actions increased French control, they also ensured that resistance would never disappear. In real history, Napoleon insulted Talleyrand publicly and dismissed his warnings. Though he retained him as foreign minister, he increasingly ignored diplomatic restraint. Talleyrand, disillusioned, began secretly passing information to Austria and Russia. This betrayal severely undermined French strategy. In this alternate timeline, Napoleon recognizes the danger of endless escalation. Rather than sidelining Talleyrand, he empowers him. Peace treaties are designed not to destroy enemies, but to reshape incentives. Austria loses territory but retains prestige. Prussia is weakened but preserved as a buffer state. Russia is treated not as a future enemy, but as a necessary partner. This shift has profound consequences. Coalitions become harder to form. European powers begin to calculate costs rather than act out of fear. Napoleon remains dominant, but his dominance appears stable rather than revolutionary. Legitimacy, not terror, becomes the foundation of French leadership.
Unable to defeat Britain at sea, Napoleon sought victory through economic warfare. The continental system, introduced in 1806, attempted to isolate Britain by banning European trade with British goods. Napoleon believed Britain's industrial economy would collapse without access to continental markets. This assumption misunderstood Britain's position. Britain was not simply a European power, it was the center of a global commercial network. Its navy protected trade routes across the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and beyond. When Europe closed its ports, Britain redirected commerce to its colonies and overseas markets. British merchants adapted rapidly, developing new partnerships and exploiting existing colonial structures. The true victims of the continental system were France's allies. Russia's export-driven economy suffered immediate losses, particularly in grain, timber, and raw materials that traditionally flowed toward Western Europe. Smuggling became rampant along coastlines and border regions. Corruption spread throughout European ports as merchants and local officials found ways to bypass restrictions. Instead of uniting the continent, the system deepened resentment toward France and increased the perception that Napoleon's empire was exploitative rather than cooperative. In this alternate history, Napoleon abandons ideological rigidity and embraces pragmatic economic governance. Trade restrictions remain official policy, but enforcement becomes selective and strategic. Major allies receive exemptions, allowing Russia and Austria to maintain limited commercial relationships with Britain. Smaller states are encouraged to trade internally within the Napoleonic sphere, stimulating economic integration rather than economic isolation. This decision transforms the continental system from a rigid blockade into a flexible economic alliance. Instead of weakening France's partners, it encourages mutual dependence. Continental industries expand under protective tariffs, while agricultural exporters maintain stable markets. France strengthens its economic leadership without provoking rebellion. Most importantly, Franco-Russian relations remain stable, removing one of the primary causes of the catastrophic 1812 campaign.
The Battle of Trafalgar has long been romanticized as the moment Napoleon lost his chance to invade Britain. Popular narratives often suggest that a single naval victory might have allowed French armies to cross the English Channel and force Britain into submission. In reality, the situation was far more complex and deeply structural. The French Navy had been severely weakened during the Revolution. Many experienced officers were executed, imprisoned, or forced into exile because of their noble backgrounds. Naval academies collapsed, training standards deteriorated, and institutional memory disappeared. While France still possessed shipyards capable of building impressive warships, it lacked the professional officer corps necessary to operate them effectively. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy had spent decades refining maritime doctrine, logistics, and seamanship. British sailors gained constant operational experience through global patrols and colonial protection. Their command structure emphasized initiative and decentralized tactical decision-making, giving British captains flexibility during combat. These advantages were not easily replaced by simply constructing more ships. In this alternate timeline, Napoleon acknowledges that immediate naval supremacy is unrealistic. Instead of forcing risky confrontations, he introduces what historians later describe as the strategic patience doctrine. French fleets remain in protected harbors, while massive investments are directed toward shipbuilding, officer education, and naval infrastructure. This shift requires Napoleon to abandon his usual preference for rapid, decisive confrontation, demonstrating an unusual degree of long-term strategic thinking. Training academies are expanded across French coastal cities, including Brest, Toulon, and Rochefort. Officers are selected based on competence rather than political loyalty or social background. Standardized naval doctrine begins to emerge, emphasizing coordinated fleet maneuvers, improved signaling systems, and better integration between naval and coastal artillery defenses. Spanish shipyards, now fully cooperative due to stable diplomatic relations, contribute additional production capacity. Spain had long possessed significant naval resources, but struggled with administrative inefficiency and inconsistent funding. Under coordinated Franco-Spanish planning, these shipyards begin producing vessels at a far more reliable pace. The combined fleets gradually narrow Britain's numerical advantage, while also creating a broader pool of trained officers and sailors. Minor naval engagements are carefully selected to build operational experience rather than gamble for decisive victories. French and Spanish fleets practice convoy protection, commerce raiding, and coastal defense operations. These missions allow naval officers to gain confidence and tactical competence without risking catastrophic losses. Over time, this experience produces a new generation of commanders capable of challenging British tactical superiority. This steady modernization changes naval psychology across Europe. Britain remains dominant, but its absolute confidence begins to erode. French fleets become increasingly capable of contesting specific sea zones, particularly in the Mediterranean and Atlantic approaches. Even limited French success forces British planners to disperse their fleets across wider defensive zones, reducing their ability to concentrate overwhelming force in any single theater. The strategic patience doctrine also transforms economic warfare. Rather than attempting to blockade Britain entirely, French naval forces focus on disrupting British trade routes selectively. Commerce raiding, coordinated with privateers operating under official sanction, increases insurance costs for British merchants and complicates maritime logistics. Although Britain's global trade network remains strong, maintaining it becomes more expensive and resource-intensive. Additionally, improved naval coordination allows France to protect its own commercial shipping more effectively. Merchant convoys receive consistent escort support, reducing losses and encouraging increased continental trade. This protection strengthens the economic integration of the Napoleonic alliance, reinforcing France's leadership position without requiring total naval dominance. Over time, British naval supremacy transitions from unquestioned fact to contested advantage. While Britain still possesses superior global reach, the emergence of a capable Franco-Spanish fleet forces London to adopt a more defensive maritime posture. Naval supremacy becomes something Britain must continuously maintain, rather than something it can assume permanently. Perhaps most importantly, Napoleon's willingness to delay confrontation at sea reflects a broader transformation in his leadership style. By prioritizing long-term institutional development over immediate battlefield glory, he demonstrates the type of strategic maturity necessary for sustaining a continental empire. The sea remains contested, Britain remains powerful, but the balance of power gradually shifts toward multipolar maritime competition rather than British exclusivity.
Napoleon's invasion of Spain represented one of the most catastrophic political miscalculations of his reign. Spain had been a long-standing ally, but Napoleon's distrust of the Spanish monarchy led him to replace it with his brother Joseph. This decision triggered a massive popular uprising fueled by religious loyalty, nationalism, and resentment toward foreign occupation. The resulting Peninsular War drained French manpower and resources for years. Spanish guerrilla warfare disrupted supply lines and forced Napoleon to commit hundreds of thousands of soldiers to occupation duties. Britain exploited the crisis by establishing a permanent continental foothold, transforming Iberia into a grinding battlefield. In this alternate timeline, Napoleon adopts a radically different strategy. Spain is treated as a sovereign partner rather than a subordinate client. Portuguese resistance to the continental system still prompts military intervention, but French and Spanish forces conduct the campaign jointly, ensuring that Spanish pride and political autonomy remain intact. Portugal becomes a negotiated protectorate rather than a conquered territory. Spanish elites receive territorial incentives and economic privileges, strengthening their commitment to the Napoleonic alliance. Without widespread occupation, no guerrilla resistance emerges. Britain loses its opportunity to establish a sustained land campaign in Europe. Central Europe undergoes equally careful restructuring. In actual history, Napoleon's creation of the Duchy of Warsaw alarmed Russia by reviving Polish nationalism. The new state signaled the possibility of a French-supported invasion into Russian territory. Combined with economic tensions caused by the continental system, this development made conflict almost inevitable. In this alternate scenario, Polish lands are redistributed between Austria and Russia, satisfying both powers while eliminating revolutionary symbolism. Prussia remains intact as a weakened but functional buffer state, separating French and Russian spheres of influence. These adjustments reduce fear-driven alliances and replace them with cautious coexistence.
Without economic confrontation, territorial provocation, or ideological hostility, the Franco-Russian relationship evolves into a durable partnership. Napoleon strengthens this alliance further through dynastic marriage with the Romanov family, creating both symbolic and political bonds between the two empires. Austria, focused on expansion into the Balkans and Ottoman territories, becomes increasingly invested in maintaining peace with France. Britain, meanwhile, faces growing strategic isolation. Naval supremacy remains intact, but without continental allies, Britain struggles to translate maritime dominance into political victory. The War of 1812 against the United States drains British resources and divides public opinion. In this alternate timeline, American military planning improves slightly, forcing Britain to commit additional ships and manpower across the Atlantic. Simultaneously, Franco-Spanish shipbuilding programs begin producing fleets capable of contesting British control in selected regions. Though Britain retains overall superiority, the psychological shift is significant. For the first time, British policymakers confront the possibility that naval dominance might not remain permanent. By the mid-1810s, anti-war sentiment grows within Britain. Economic strain, colonial commitments, and the absence of reliable continental partners make continued conflict increasingly unpopular. Diplomatic negotiations eventually produce a comprehensive European peace settlement. Britain retains its colonial empire and naval prestige, but formally recognizes French continental leadership. Europe emerges transformed. France controls Western and Central Europe through a network of allied states, client monarchies, and economic partnerships. Russia expands its influence across Eastern Europe and into the Balkans. Austria becomes a regional stabilizer, balancing both powers while pursuing southern expansion. The absence of catastrophic wars preserves infrastructure, population growth, and economic stability across the continent. Industrial development accelerates under coordinated continental markets. Political modernization spreads gradually through administrative reforms inspired by the Napoleonic Code. Historians later describe this period as the beginning of the Napoleonic century, an era defined not by endless revolutionary upheaval, but by managed competition between three dominant superpowers: France, Britain, and Russia. Napoleon Bonaparte is remembered not merely as a conqueror, but as the architect of a new European order capable of surviving beyond his lifetime.